community is relevant to you, whether it's because you're a reader yourself, a writer yourself, maybe you have a friend or a family member who's here tonight that brings you out, maybe you just recognize the innate value of the literature within our culture and you wish to support it. Whatever your reason for being here, I thank you very much for the time and attention that you're giving to this evening. And now on to the event. Just quickly, it takes three parts. We start with our finalists reading from their collections of poetry. Then we'll do a Q&A, which will include an opportunity for you in the audience to ask questions. And then at the conclusion of the Q&A, we will announce the winner of this year's E.J. Pratt Poetry Award. Afterwards, you're welcome to stay for refreshments. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to your host for this evening, Mary Dalton. Mary is the Poet Laureate of the City of St. John's and Professor Emerita of English at Memorial University, and author of 5 books of poetry, among them Mary Begot, the meaning of which I only just learned in the last couple of weeks, Red Ledger and Hooking, a Book of Centos, as well as a prose collection, Edge, Essays, Reviews, Interviews. Edge, Essays, Reviews, Interviews. A chapbook, Waste Ground, appeared in 2017. In cooperation with CHMR Radio, she currently hosts a poetry podcast, Flahulik, focused on her poetry and that of other poets in St. John's. At the 2020 Sparks Festival, a festival she founded, incidentally, she will read from a new series of poems centered on the character Alba. I'd like to invite you up, Mary. Thank you.
Gesture towards the splendor of Newfoundland poetry that we have now. I want you to watch me carefully. Now, that's the magisterial lapels pluck of Stephen Colbert, but I have happier news to bring you this evening than he does in his nightly evisceration of a certain monster. So, I have happier news of the accomplished writers whose works appear on the 2019 E.J. Pratt Poetry Award shortlist and who will read from their books this evening. But first, in honor of the great poet E.J. Pratt, I'd like to read a brief poem of his, one of my favorites, in which Pratt strikes the true Newfoundland note of grim humor in the face of disaster, a mordant note that crops up occasionally in the poems of some of the others we'll hear tonight, in the books at least. So this poem has to do with a drowned captain being retrieved from under the water with a grapnel. That was one of the functions of that small anchor for retrieving objects submerged. The drag irons, you get the idea of what's going on from the title itself. The drag irons. He who had learned for 30 years to ride the sea and storms in punt and skiff and brig would hardly scorn to take before he died his final lap in Neptune's whirligig. But with his captain's blood he did resent, with livid silence and with glassy look, this fishy treatment when his years were spent to come up dead upon a grapnel hook. You can hear Pratt online, and Trent University has, I think, almost his entire collection of poetry online to read if you don't happen to have a print copy. I recommend hearing Pratt. He's known as the great poet of Canada. He was the first national poet, considered the national poet. He wrote the great epics of nation building. But when you hear Pratt read his poems, you hear a Newfoundland voice. You hear a Newfoundland accent. You hear Newfoundland rhythms. It adds, I think, to the poems a very resonant dimension. So we poets here owe Pratt a debt. As a poet of Newfoundland and then of the larger nation which Newfoundland and Labrador were to become part of, he is our modern precursor. Many call him the first modernist Canadian poet. In his lyrics and his epics, he showed us something of what is possible. So I recommend him to you. Not that you need it, perhaps, you here tonight who come through rain. So the three writers we'll hear this evening, each in her own way, builds on and develops further and explores new territory, building on that legacy of Pratt. Helen Porter, with her acute awareness of social injustice, with her keen eye for hypocrisies and contradictions of all sorts. Alison Dyer, with her sensitivity to the landscapes and the flora of this place, and Agnes Walsh, with her delicately nuanced depictions of how we are all caught in, beleaguered by, time. Each of these writers has her own distinctive voice. Considered as a set, there are 3 volumes we're focusing on here tonight are a blazing affirmations of the emergence of the voices and perspectives of women in Newfoundland poetry. It's my pleasure now to introduce them to you and tell you a little of what our panel of esteemed judges, poets Mark Callanan, Patrick Warner, and also Greg Pike, had to say about their shortlisted books. Our first reader will be Alison Dyer, author of I'd Write the Sea Like a Parlor Game. What a title. And what a cover. One point of connection with Pratt. All 3 books tonight, you'll notice, are beautifully designed. I think it's about time we have a prize for book design in Newfoundland and Labrador. I hope the idea might take seed here. I'd Write the Sea is Alison Dyer's debut book of poetry, published by Killick Press in 2017. The book was a finalist for the Atlantic Poetry Book Award, now known as the J.M. Abraham Poetry Award, in 2018. Alison's poetry and short fiction have appeared in The Fiddlehead, Riddle Fence, Grain, and the Nashwack Review, among others, and in anthologies, including a League of Canadian Poets anthology. She has twice won Newfoundland and Labrador Arts and Letters Awards. And Alison grew up in England and in Quebec. She now divides her time between St. John's and Hants Harbor, working as a freelance writer, organic farmer, and forager. The judges have written very detailed and compelling accounts, and tonight I'm reading you bits of what they've said about each author. I'm not sure if the full accounts will be on the WANL website or not. I believe there are excerpts there already. Well, here's some of what the judges had to say about Alison Dyer's book. The poems in I'd Write the Sea Like a Parlor Game are steeped in realism, particularly in the Newfoundland environment, its landscapes, streetscapes, rocks, flora, and chickens. Dyer's imagination engages nature not to dominate, but to fuse perception with language, which she does admirably, page after page, often in miniature, and with surprising and affecting metaphors, as in the title poem. I'd write the sea like a parlor game. That could take your mind, keep your mind occupied for a while. Her confident lines are textured and musical. These poems are a love song to place and are to be savored. Please welcome Alison Dyer. Oh, and if you haven't already, could you please turn off your cell phones? It doesn't improve a poem at all to have one ring in the middle. Truer words.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Mary. Thank you all for coming out. It's wonderful to see so many faces. And I want to thank the sponsor of the award for keeping this up. It's terrific. And I am so delighted to be up here with Helen and Agnes. It's pretty amazing. I am thrilled. I understand we each have 10 minutes, so I will get down to reading. I had been rereading recently Red Ledger, one of Mary Dalton's poetry books, and one of them was called Downtown Haikus, so I thought I'd start with a nod to Mary and read capital haikus. Spring. Fog enshrouds, rain penetrates, snow retreats. Summer. Sweet diesel, salt breeze, Southside Hill ovation, tarmac-warmed buskers. Autumn. Armored skies, free-falling winds, plants on life support. Winter. Ice-slicked sidewalks, pedestrians leaning, radio talk shows fire up. And continuing with this time of year for November, I think I'll read one that I haven't read before, I think, for an audience, called Chasing Winter Blues. In grayscale November, with sharp, thin church spires and bloated smokestacks vertical against the latitudes of crow calls, pools of slush and slings of plastic bags between trees, a noose flying at Gibbet Hill would seem normal above the cataract eye of the harbor. I vow to buy a pair of orange winter boots. Some of these are of St. John's, such as this one called Winter Excessive. Masquerading as ghosts, a host of unholies rattles the dresser mirror, testing soffits, trim and chimney blocks, rocking my bed, looking for that sweet spot of weakness, cracking gyprock, creaking frames, and oh me nerves, you wind me up. And again, I was going to read one a little different that's not really Newfoundland-based, but I think in this time of climate change activism, I was reminded of a poem that I wrote about 10 years ago. I went to an art installation at the Rooms by Jan Kabatoff, and this one is called Ice Floes and Sound Retreats. And I just want to say, of course, the next global climate change strike is this Friday, and I hope you all go. I think it's one of the most important things that we can do. So this one is called Ice Floes and Sound Retreats. The weight of our mass desires ablates thick continental glaciers. Tongues of ice, eons in silence, speak. At Christmas time, between last-minute shopping, we share in your journey from Argentina to Nunavut, your art installation on ice retreats. The drip, drip, drip of age-old water belies the rapid rate of melt, and we drown in the sound flowing in, out, on the cusp of Copenhagen. I thought I'd end up with a couple of short poems from the suite Apostles of the Boreal, a suite of 12 poems on the native trees and shrubs. I'll have some water. See, my friend David Benson is here, and I will read one of his favorites. White Pine, the White Night. Needles cast to north and bearing compass, Orion's belt in dark of night. Your mast, timbers staged for rough Atlantic crossings. You sailed, my night, you dead men walking. How many ships were hewn of your fine trunks? How many men were made to walk your planks? Such broad shoulders cut a foot or more abreast, squared up to lay men down to rest. From books and learning, pine-clad hills yet live in our imagination. Still, I imagine a tall, straight form unbending to inclinations of brutal storms. But for sour merchants quibbling pennies, pounds, or inches, you, my white knight, stood before the axe and fell. And I'll finish with one entitled White Birch. White Birch, the Moonchild. Some calendar girl you turned out to be. A barefoot, pale-skinned hippie with a tie-dyed dress. Call me Petula or River Song if you like. A real or boreal fashionista, not so flashy as the maple, does she or doesn't she? No socialist hankerings like the spruce. But your moon-dappled tattooed trunk, oh so cool, belies your heat, those BTUs of wild winter love. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. It's great to hear some of those poems again. We're about to hear poems by Helen Porter, and I've always disliked that trope, Oh, there's no need, you all know there's no need to introduce so-and-so. I think there's always need to introduce, to honor be given, attention be paid. And so I'll tell you, you all know Helen Porter, I'm sure, but I'll tell you a little about her and about what the jury had to say. Helen Porter is one of our most distinguished and most popular writers. She has been publishing articles, stories, plays, and poems for 6 decades. Born and raised in St. John's, she has served the community throughout her life as a teacher, political activist, and feminist. Her dedication and her accomplishments have been acknowledged in various ways, notably with an honorary doctorate from Memorial University and with the Order of Canada. The judges had this to say about her shortlisted book, Full Circle, published in 2018 by Breakwater Books. Another elegant cover, a very simple and appealing cover. So, the judges. It is no mistake that Helen Porter's Full Circle, the long-awaited debut poetry collection from an acknowledged cornerstone of the local literary community, begins with a poem called Circle Game. In alluding to Joni Mitchell's song, Porter signals her collection's similar concerns: the passage of time, the growth and maturation of the individual, and above all, the undeniably cyclical nature of life. One of Porter's virtues is in balancing the book's tonal registers from, and I'm compressing here, from playful self-deprecation to an intimate confessional vein to her sly skewering of patriarchal constructs in her revision of Rudyard Kipling's If. You might want to put this one on your fridge, maybe beside If. Throughout, Helen Porter reports on all us captives on the carousel of time with a kind and sympathetic eye and from a vital feminist viewpoint. Full Circle is a welcome first collection from a trailblazer of Newfoundland and Labrador literature. Now, Helen is going to recite a poem from memory, I'm told, and then her son, Steve, is going to read a few for her. So, Helen, whenever you're ready.
Thank you very much, Mary. Well, the first thing I have to tell you is that I can't read anything because I'm blind. They call it legally blind. I'm not sure what it means. But it means that one thing it means that I can't read. And of course I loved reading since I was about 2. Anyhow, there are a lot of substitutes in radio especially, not so much television. And I'm a great talker. Not a great talker, but a great talker. And I have some friends here tonight that I've had many conversations with them. Very glad to see my members of my family, my son Steve, and my daughter Kathy, and my sister Brenda, and Anne, my daughter Anne. She's a doctor, and she nearly always late for those things. And anyhow, it's great to be surrounded. And I must say, I have to mention my son Johnny, who died 3 years ago, and who was a marvelous writer himself, but unlike his mother, a rather shy person. So didn't choose to publish. Good actor too. Anyhow, I'm very, very pleased to be invited to this wonderful get-together of readers, writers, and just people who like reading and some who like writing. I just was thinking, now I don't think I have to do a poem now because the two of them are taking care of that. So that'll let me off the hook a bit because I don't like memorizing. I'm sure to get one thing wrong. What I would like to say, there are many people in the audience that I know, and probably lots there that I don't know are there because I can't see them. Anyway, and in naming people, of course, you forget somebody, and so forgive me if I do that, but I have to mention a few people in particular. I'm glad some of my writer friends are here tonight. And you all know about Bernice Morgan. She's here, in case you don't know, in case you want to get an autograph or anything. Anyhow, and I can't think about Bernice without thinking about Jerry Rubin, who very sadly died a few years ago. I would say the best little-known poet in Canada, probably the whole northern, the States and all that too. Just marvelous. Never came across anyone like her, and I can't explain what makes her so good. But just try it. There are still some books available. And then another friend. When you get as old as I am, 89. Can you believe it? Soon be 90. You have a lot of friends and it's hard to remember. There's maybe some here, as I said, that I don't know are here. But I know that